Selected parts from the book One Life is Not Enough, written by Shri K. Natwar Singh. Part 35. In November 1986, the SARC summit was to be held in Bangalore. Rajiv Gandhi and Sri Lankan President J.R. Jayawardene were the most sought after leaders at that summit. The unwritten rule followed at summits is that bilateral issues are not raised. At the opening session, all heads of state speak and controversy is avoided. We managed to get hold of a copy of Jayawardene's speech, which was a severe indictment of our Sri Lanka policy. We conveyed our misgivings to him and he assured us that he would delete the portions which we found objectionable. On the podium, President Jayawardene announced that he was so moved by the welcome he had received in the land of Gandhi and Nehru that he would speak from the heart. He then proceeded to attack India's support to Tamil terrorists in Sri Lanka and invoked the Panchashil Treaty agreement signed between Nehru and Chow Enlai, which spoke of non interference in the internal affairs of other countries. Rajiv wisely decided not to respond. At the end of the first day, he instructed P. Chidambaram and me to meet the Tamil Nadu Chief Minister M. G. Ramchandran, who had brought with him Velupillai Prabhakaran, the founder and leader of the Liberation Tigers of Tamil Eelam LTTE. M. G. Ramchandran, who was not comfortable with English, brought with him one of his ministers to act as interpreter, also named Ramchandran. Prabhakaran too did not speak English. He had brought with him Anton Balasingam as his interpreter. Balasingam was a crypto communist, the sort of man who could neither ignore nor trust. My first impression of Prabhakaran was not favorable. He was short, strongly built, and stubborn with a one track mind. He was committed to the idea of Elam and would not let go of it. I told him that India was fully acquainted with the just demands of Sri Lankan Tamils. The Prime Minister had spoken to President Jayawardene candidly of the grievances of the Tamils. India was opposed to Elam and supported Sri Lanka's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Talking to Prabhakaran was an exhausting experience. I told him that there could come a time when he would have to face the combined might of the Indian and the Sri Lankan armies. He was obdurate. His response to my scarcely veiled threat was, I shall never give up Elam even if I am to die for it. Frankly, at that time, I underestimated the depth of his fanatical determination. We had kept Prabhakar's presence in Bangalore a secret, but somehow President Jayawardene got to know it. Rajiv, hand him over to me. I shall hang him in Jaffna, where he shot dead the mayor who was a Tamilian, he threatened. The Prime Minister held several meetings with Jayawardene. For some reason, Rajiv was in a great hurry to find a solution for the ethnic problems in Sri Lanka. Perhaps it was his successful handling of the Punjab and Assam crisis which had given him confidence. However, Rajiv Gandhi was not familiar with the history of the ethnic problems in Sri Lanka. It is my firm belief that presidents and prime ministers should not get involved in the nitty gritties of negotiations. They neither have the time nor the expertise for it. As the weeks went by, I got the impression that Jayawardene was getting the better of Rajiv Gandhi. In the next few months, after the summit, Minister of State P. Chidambaram and I made several trips to Sri Lanka. On the way, we made it a point to visit M.G. Ramchandran, a former film star who, apart from being head of the government, had a huge following in the state. It was widely alleged that he covertly supported and financed the LTTE, and their cadres were being given military training in Tamil Nadu. He also considered Jaffna an extension of Tamil Nadu. Prime Minister Rajiv Gandhi realized that we had to keep MGR on board, and he was right in doing so because to bypass a formidable a chief minister would only add to our problems. The most important trip that Chidambaram and I made was on 19th December 1986. Chidambaram was much more knowledgeable about Sri Lanka than I was. Apart from meeting the Sri Lankan president, we held detailed and extensive discussions with ministers Lalit Atulit Mudali and Gamini Disnayake. They were the upcoming men of Sri Lanka. Lalit Atulit Mudali was in charge of national security, and he was also in close contact with the Americans. He did not trust India. Our High Commissioner in Sri Lanka, J. N. Dikshit, said that he would keep an eye on Lalit Atulit Mudali. Gamini was a man after my heart, and we took to each other from our very first meeting. While Chidambaram and I were in conference with the two ministers, news came that a Sri Lankan Airlines plane had been attacked just as it was about to take off. 16 people were dead and over 40 seriously injured. Lalit Atulit Mudali implied that the blast had been carried out at the behest of Ra to put pressure on Sri Lanka. I gently cautioned him that no useful purpose would be served by taking India's name every time things went wrong in his country. He should be spending more time in resolving internal problems. This was also the first time that I had worked with Chidambaram. I witnessed firsthand his subtlety of mind and his mastery over details. He had one other important asset. He never got into a flap. We also paid our respects to Mrs. Sirimavo Bandaranaike, the former Prime Minister, in an attempt to reduce her hostility to India's efforts to find a solution. She heard us out but did not hide her intense dislike for Jayavardhane, who had treated her rather indelicately. He blamed Rajiv Gandhi for interfering in the internal affairs of Sri Lanka. The Prime Minister Ranasinghe Premadasa did not participate in the meetings called by his president during our stay in Colombo. Not only that, he refused to meet us. On our return to Delhi, we told the Prime Minister that the Sri Lankan leadership was a house divided. Prime Minister Premadasa and Security Minister Lalit Atulit Mudali were on one side, and Minister of Lands, Land Development and Mahaveli Development Gamini Disnaike and Minister De Silva were with the President. My assessment of Jayavardhane was, on the whole, favorable. He spoke well and was never in a hurry. A devout Buddhist, he never raised his voice and was always calm. But there was a negative side. He was clever and shifty, and it was difficult to pin him down. The December 19th proposal was conveyed to M.G. Ramchandran. Our intelligence agencies were keeping track of Prabhakaran and his henchmen. 1986 ended with uncertainties and the dim prospect of a conflict free Sri Lanka. The Sri Lankan economy was hemorrhaging on account of the conflict between the government and the LTTE. Chidambaram and I made a couple more visits to Colombo. We also met Prabhakaran in Chennai in the office of the Chief Minister. When we went to convey the December 19th proposals to M.G. Ramchandran. M.G. Ramchandran, without informing us, had gifted 40 million rupees to the LTTE. All rules and regulations had been flouted, but Rajiv Gandhi was unable to do anything about this. MGR's vision was confined to Tamil Nadu. To make matters worse, our intelligence agencies were at sixes and sevens. Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, China, and Israel were fishing in the turbulent waters of Sri Lanka. The Israelis were training Sri Lankan commandos. At the same time, they were also training our commandos. Only Israelis could achieve this. In May 1987, a crisis developed. Jayavardhane was persuaded by Lalit Atulit Mudali that the time was ripe for Operation Liberation. Jaffna was cordoned off and even essential supplies were prevented from getting to the city. To make matters worse, on 27th May, Jayavardhane announced, "This time the fight is a fight to the finish." Rajiv Gandhi was troubled at this outburst and conveyed his displeasure through our High Commission. On 20th May, the Prime Minister warned Sri Lanka that India would intervene to safeguard the welfare of Sri Lankan Tamils. This was ignored. Meanwhile, the situation in Jaffna was deteriorating and essential commodities were running short. The Jaffna Peninsula was on the verge of a humanitarian tragedy. Rajiv decided to send essential food and medical supplies by sea on 2nd June 1987. P.V. Narasimha Rao and I were asked to draft a statement conveying India's intention to the Sri Lankan authorities. The glaring fact was that Sri Lanka had not asked for humanitarian aid, and not only were we forcing their hand, we would also be violating the maritime boundaries of a friendly country. The flotilla arrived in Jaffna waters on the given date. The Sri Lankan Navy stopped the Indian boats and asked them to return, which they did. We had instructed the commander of the flotilla to avoid a confrontation. The Prime Minister did not take kindly to this and decided to take stern action. A meeting was called at 7 Racecourse Road. I was also asked to attend. I arrived a few minutes late and the meeting had already begun. It was being attended by senior cabinet ministers, defense chiefs, the principal secretary to the Prime Minister, the cabinet secretary, raw officials, and the foreign secretary. After listening to the proceedings for about 10 minutes, I began to feel uneasy. I realized that something extraordinary was being discussed. I asked the PM, "What action do we have in mind?" His reply increased my disquiet. He had decided to airdrop humanitarian aid over Jaffna. I inquired if we had informed the Sri Lankan government. A member of the cabinet almost shouted at me, "Natwarji, what are you saying? Why should we inform the Sri Lankans?" Because Sri Lanka is an independent sovereign nation and a member of the United Nations, the NAM, and the Commonwealth. It is also our close and friendly neighbor. It is not a hostile country. If we were to send planes to drop humanitarian supplies into Jaffna, we would be violating Sri Lanka's airspace, I replied. I asked if we had informed our permanent representative at the UN, Chinmaya Garekhan, about this decision. This had not been done either. I said that it was imperative for us to do so to make sure that the Security Council did not meet to discuss the Sri Lanka crisis. I had no doubt that most of the Security Council members would sympathize with Sri Lanka. The Prime Minister agreed that I must speak to Chinmaya, a mature and level headed diplomat. I told him what we had in mind. He was appalled. I told him that no meeting of the Security Council should be held to discuss this. He delivered. No meeting was called. I asked the Prime Minister if we had informed the Sri Lankan High Commissioner in New Delhi, Bernard Tilakaratne. The Prime Minister said that I should ask him to see me at South Block at noon. Bernard was, as usual, his ebullient self. When I broke the news to him, he slumped in his chair. He asked me when the airdrop would take place. I told him that it would be sometime between 2:30 and 3:30 p.m. I asked him to speak to his president. He said he could not get through in time. Use my telephone, I said. He spoke to his president in Sinhalese language. I could not follow what was being said, but I heard the president's voice loud and clear. He sounded enraged about not being informed earlier. I informed Jane Dikshit in Colombo and gave him the time of the airdrop. Two planes were to fly in, one carrying aid and the other representatives of the media. I made sure that the aid items were loaded into the first plane in the presence of the media, who might otherwise report that India was dropping arms meant for LTTE. The airdrop was eventually completed on 4th June 1987 by cargo aircraft escorted by fighter planes. The Sri Lankan reaction to this demonstration of military might was one of shock, anger, and outrage. We had violated an independent nation's airspace. The government of Sri Lanka had not asked for aid. The Sri Lankan army continued their onslaught on the LTTE, and Prabhakaran soon realized that he was cornered. He instructed one of his representatives in Singapore to contact N. Ram, the editor of The Hindu, to tell him that the LTTE would accept a political compromise provided the Sri Lankan government agreed to the proposals that he would make. N. Ram passed the news to the Gamini Disnaike, with whom he had cordial relations. The LTT's proposals were: number 1, military operations by the Sri Lankan government should cease and Sri Lankan troops should be confined to their barracks in Jaffna. Number 2, the northern and eastern precincts should be merged. Number 3, power should be devolved on the basis of the December 19th proposals. Number 4, Tamil should be recognized as the official language at par with Sinhalese. And number 5, a Tamilian should be the vice president of the country. Gamini passed these to Dikshit. On perceiving that the Sri Lankan government reacted positively to Prabhakaran's proposals, Rajiv had a change of heart. He said that we could take these proposals further and come to an agreement with the Sri Lankan government. This U-turn was wholly unexpected. Thanks for listening. We managed to get hold of a copy of Jayawardene's speech, which was a severe indictment of our Sri Lanka policy. We conveyed our misgivings to him, and he assured us that he would delete the portions which found objectionable. Misgivings, MISGIVINGS. Misgivings means a feeling of doubt about the outcome of something. Talking to Prabhakaran was an exhausting experience. I told him that there could come a time when he would have to face the combined might of the Indian and the Sri Lankan armies. He was obdurate. OBDURATE. Obdurate means stubbornly refusing to change one's opinions. It is my firm belief that presidents and prime ministers should not get involved in the nitty gritties of negotiations. Nitty gritty means the most important aspects or practical details of a subject or situation. Nitty gritty means essentials. This was also the first time that I had worked with Chidambaram. I witnessed firsthand his subtlety of mind and his mastery over details. He had one other important aspect. He never got into a flap. Subtlety, subtlety, subtlety means acuteness or penetration of mind. Subtlety of mind means refinement. Get into flap. Get into flap means become worried or excited. To be in a state of panic. To make matters worse, our intelligence agencies were at sixes and sevens. At sixes and sevens means in a confused, badly organized situation. The flotilla arrived in Jaffna waters on the given date. FLOTILLA. Flotilla means a small fleet of ships or boats. This had not been done either. I said that it was imperative for us to do so to make sure that the Security Council did not meet to discuss Sri Lanka. Imperative, IMPERATIVE. Imperative means extremely important. Bernard was, as usual, his ebullient self. EBULLIENT. Ebullient means cheerful and full of energy. Thank you for listening.